And so now we can get started with React Rally in Cyberspace 2020. It's here, y'all. The time has come. So welcome all. My name is Anjana Vakil. I'm going to be your MC today. I'm a developer advocate at Observable. I'm based in San Francisco, and I was lucky enough to attend React Rally last year, 2019, where I spoke. And so I am so excited to be back here with you all for 2020. Now, this edition is pretty different from past React rallies. Definitely wish we could all be hanging out together in person, but circumstances being what they are, the organizing team has done just such a fantastic job pivoting and bringing this conference to cyberspace. So I hope you are all as excited as I am to try it out in this new format. We've got some pretty special treats for you ahead. Amazing talks are coming your way. So get excited. I don't even know if you can comprehend how amazing. It's going to be mind-blowing. Like, we have some fantastic speakers for y'all today. And bonus, in between all of the amazing talks, we have some really fun break activities. We're going to be making some things together, doing some crafting together. We've already had a little yoga. And as the day goes on, we have the Veto platform to stay in touch with all of each other. So everything you need to know for the conference today is going to be in Veto. The schedule, all of the info about talks and speakers, lots of other fun links and extra info, including even a coloring page. You can color in if you like to do a little mindful coloring while you're listening there. And there's also, of course, the chat community. So we can send messages to each other. We can all stay in touch, and you'll also be able to chat with the speakers during the day. And Veto has a lot of really cool features. I don't know about you, but this is my first time playing around with it. It seems like a really cool platform. Make sure you explore all the different features there. One thing you might not have noticed yet is that you can change all of the schedule to your own time zone in Video. There's a little link under the video, in Veto. And speaking of things you might notice under the video, our whole conference is going to be live captioned today. It already is being live captioned today, thanks to Amanda at White Coat Captioning. So very exciting to have that. Love to see live captioning at conferences like this. So before we get started today, a couple of items of business. First of all, keep in mind that we have a code of conduct for today. You can read the code of conduct at reactrally.com/conduct. So everyone participating in the conference, participating in the chats, all of that is expected to adhere to that code of conduct, which is there to protect and make it a wonderful, positive day for all of us. And if you do need to report an incident or ask a question or contact the team in any way around that, there is a button in the menu in Veto, which you can use. And you can also use the buttons on the reactrally.com/conduct page, or you can also email team@reactrally.com to get in touch. A few other fun things you might not have caught from your welcome emails. A reminder that if you purchase the tickets through Tito, you can go in and add t-shirt info. If you are in the US and Canada, there you will be getting a t-shirt included in your ticket. So make sure that you go into Tito and click on change ticket and add your t-shirt info by midnight Mountain Time tonight. That's the deadline for that. And also, we want to make sure that everybody is aware that we have some really great sponsors for the day, which make this whole conference possible. And you're going to want to check out the sponsor pages to also see about maybe some fun surprises that they might have for you in there. Now, we want to make sure that we're all sharing our own experiences of the conference. Unfortunately, we can't all be on the video call all at the same time, but we can all be on Twitter all at the same time. So don't forget to tweet. The hashtag for today is ReactRally, hashtag ReactRally, all one word. Make sure you share with us, what you're making, our little activities during the breaks. If you want to show off your amazing yoga poses from this morning, if you want to show off the really cool lunch creations that you make later, you can share all of that with us, and we'll be posting the wall of tweets tagged with the React Rally hashtag throughout the day so we can get a sense of what's going on, what's up in the zeitgeist. Alrighty, so keep in mind, we've got those lunch and coffee breaks coming up today. You're going to need some ingredients if you want to follow along at home. All of the info about that is in Veto, so make sure you check that out and get prepared. And I think with that, we are getting pretty close to launching our talks for the day. We have some absolutely amazing speakers, as I may have gushed about and will continue to gush about earlier and later. So the talks today are just going to be absolutely wonderful. And we have an extra special treat. The one and only David Khurshid, aka David K. Piano, is going to be gracing us with some musical stylings today, playing in the speakers and giving us some musical breaks as well. And I think I can confidently state that David is a machine when it comes to pumping out amazing covers with piano stylings. And we are going to be really in for a treat listening to those snippets later today. So yeah, just first of all, I want to give another huge thank you to the organizers, to the sponsors, to the speakers, and most importantly to you all for tuning in, whether you're tuning in through Vito or perhaps catching the free live stream on YouTube. You're making this event possible, and we're all just so glad to be here with you in whatever virtual way we can today. So I think it's a good time to introduce a speaker I am so excited to hear speak today. Maggie Appleton is going to be kicking off our conference today. Maggie is an illustrator, developer, anthropologist hybrid, which so cool, so cool. She is based in London and is the art director for Egghead.io. So if you've taken any Egghead courses or seen any of her talks, you might know these amazing visual explainers she does. So beautiful and so pithy, such a wonderful way to convey information, especially about really tricky concepts, whether in React or other elements of programming or otherwise. She's an expert at doing these visual metaphors and at helping the rest of us think and learn about metaphor and how it can help us visualize our problems and our domains. And I am just so excited to hear this talk. So please join me in my excitement for hearing a talk on the cultural anthropology of React from Maggie Appleton.
So this talk is going to be on the cultural anthropology of React. This is going to be about magic, kinship, and ritual among the developers. So first, I'm Maggie Appleton. I wear a couple of odd hats. I'm the art director and illustrator for a company called Egghead.io, where we teach web development. So I get to draw a lot of visual explanations of JavaScript, but I originally trained as a cultural anthropologist, so I'm going to be wearing my anthropologist hat today. I want to show you React in a fundamentally different light to the way you're used to seeing it. I want to show you what it looks like through the lens of culture. This is important because I think it's going to help us answer a question about what React is. I'm sure you've had a number of people ask you this question from outside the industry. I don't know about you, but I've never been able to come up with an answer that feels complete and fitting, that explains to people who aren't involved in the web world, which is, most humans on Earth, why React matters and why there's so many people obsessed with it. There's one way to answer this question. We can just, read the docs and take that as the official definition. It's just a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. And sure, in some ways it is that. But to me, this feels wrong as a holistic definition. No offense to the React docs, they're great. But giving someone this line isn't going to help them understand React in context within a larger cultural frame. At best, it's an incomplete description of React. Because this is a very strict technical definition. It presents React in a very reductive way. It puts it in a box. But it doesn't include anything about the role React plays in the larger web development community, or its history, or its culture. So what happens if we look at this box differently? What if we expand our understanding to include all the people who surround this little technical box and how they might affect and be affected by what's inside it? What happens if we entertain the idea that humans and the culture of React are an essential part of what defines React? Not just as a thing you npm install, but what if we consider it a cultural ecosystem that we're active participants in? Answering these kinds of questions is where cultural anthropology comes in handy. So I'm sure there's a few people wondering what cultural anthropology is. If you have never heard of it, that is very normal. It doesn't often overlap with the world of web development. It is essentially the study of human cultures and trying to understand how they work. But I think a better definition for it comes from one of my favorite anthropologists called Tim Ingold, who called it philosophy with the people in it. Anthropology tries to answer many of the same questions that philosophers concern themselves with. Why do we have language? How should we organize our societies and institutions? How do we deal with birth and death and morality and conflict? Philosophers usually turn inwards to find those answers. They go into a small, quiet room alone, and they think a lot, and they read a lot of books by mostly old dead white men, and they try to find answers. In contrast, anthropology turns outwards. It looks for the answers in other people. It's a discipline based around a practice called participant observation, which is where you go and live among communities to try and understand the way they see the world by being immersed in it on a daily basis. A much cooler way of saying this is saying that it's deep hanging out with people. That's a phrase coined by anthropologist Clifford Geertz. The goal of doing this is not to try to find one universal truth, but rather particular truths for particular people. So I've had the privilege of deep hanging out in React land for the last couple years, and I want to show you a bit of what I've noticed about our particular ways of life. So first, we should establish who we're talking about when we say the React community. Where do we think the boundaries of the React community are, and who do we think is part of it? I drew a very incomplete and fuzzy map of the React world here. It's definitely not comprehensive or to scale, but I wanted to draw your attention to two key points. First, that being a React person isn't mutually exclusive. You can be other things too. We have many overlapping and neighboring communities that we belong to. You might also be part of the DataViz world or hang out within a sub-niche like React Native. And the second interesting aspect of our community is that it has very fluid boundaries. People flow in and out quite easily, and anyone who finds it can join. To become a member, you didn't need to fill out a form or apply to a committee or go through an initiation ceremony. And I doubt there was a single moment in time when you suddenly decided you were a React person. It likely happened in small moments over many weeks and months. And you also have the freedom to leave whenever you want. So these fuzzy boundaries sometimes make us a little bit anxious because it can be hard for us to feel like a cohesive, permanent whole. It also leads to some strange cultural behaviors that I'll dive into a bit later on. Another way to try and understand the React community might be to look at some rough numbers. Data and stats always make us feel good. So there's over 4 million GitHub repos that use React. The most popular React tutorial for beginners on YouTube has over 2.3 million views, which means at least that many people needed to know what React was at some point in time. 200,000 feel aligned enough to mark themselves as members of the React.js subreddit, and the React to Flux Discord group has over 110,000. So these are all interesting indicators. But the real question is whether these numbers actually mean anything to us. Does me saying 2 million people watched a React video actually give you a deeper understanding of our community? I'm going to say no, not really. Rather than talking about stats and numbers, it's much more meaningful for us to talk about React as an imagined community. So this was a concept developed by a political scientist named Benedict Anderson in the 1980s. Anderson was mostly writing about how nations imagine themselves as collective wholes, but his theory maps well onto how online communities like React work. The idea of an imagined community says that we individually imagine the React community in our heads. It has nothing to do with being imaginary in the sense of being fake, but simply that it's something we have to mentally construct across thousands of individual minds. It gets built through shared images and rituals. So let me explain with some examples. Anderson specifically used the idea of a national daily newspaper. The act of sitting down and reading the daily news, and then imagining a whole nation of other people, similar to you, sitting and reading those exact same words at roughly the same time, creates a sense of collective belonging. It's a daily ritual that reaffirms your membership and a sense of unity with the greater whole. So, daily newspapers might sound quaint to us now, but we do the exact same thing with newsletters and Twitter and DevTO and podcasts. These are our daily newspapers. Each time you read a React newsletter email or listen to the latest episode of React podcast or tune into a live stream of the React Rally conference, you are reaffirming your place as a member of the React community. Even the small ritual of typing npm install or yarn add React adds to this imagined collective membership. We have some sense a million other developers have typed this line and shared our experience. Even though we will never see, meet, or even know the names of most of them, we still have complete confidence they exist and are out there typing React code alongside us. So now we all know that we exist in each other's minds as an odd conglomeration of imagined people. That speaks to our internal experience of how we imagine ourselves within the React community, but how about how we perform our identity as React developers to other people? We personally know we're part of it, but how do others know it? So this is where performative kinship comes in. Kinship in anthropology is a word that simply means the people we are socially bonded with, and so performative kinship is how we show those relationships on a social stage. Now, I think some people might take performance as negative, thinking it's fake or insincere, and I don't mean it that way at all. I want to introduce you to a famous sociologist called Erving Goffman, who had fascinating theories around this. Goffman argued that all our social interactions are a kind of performance. Each time we're in a social situation, it's a bit like a scene in a play. There are all these props and social cues around us that indicate how we should perform, and we perform different roles depending on the scene in front of us. For example, when I step into a grocery store, I implicitly understand from lots of physical and social signals around me that there are expectations about my role here as a grocery shopper and what I'm supposed to do and not do. If I bring in a lawn chair and park it in the middle of the bakery aisle and then settle in to read a book, that's not illegal, but it's certainly weird because that's not the role I'm supposed to play in this performance of being a grocery shopper. Doing otherwise breaks the unspoken social rules of society, and I'm going to have a very hard time being part of my community if I choose not to follow them. We also switch between these roles effortlessly. If I call one of my brothers right after shopping, I switch into being the role of bossy sibling, and I'm much more opinionated and less obedient. It's not fake, it's necessary that we adapt our behaviors to our social context. It's what makes societies work. Similarly, in certain contexts, we perform the role of React developer. So what does that look like? So this is one take on it. This tweet got quite a lot of mileage last year. It says, I saw a software engineer today, no company swag hoodie, no stickers on their laptop, no mechanical keyboard. He just sat there typing away on our default IDE like a psychopath. It's genius because it makes obvious that many of us have a very specific idea of what it means to play the role of developer in our social performance. We can, of course, choose to reject this as the stereotypical way to play the role, but we need to recognize it first before we can challenge or change it. So, as mentioned, laptop stickers are one of those more visible ways that we perform our developer identity. It's no secret developers have a rather intense enthusiasm for doing this, more so than, say, lawyers or book publishers. I think this is because developers also have far fewer physical signals that indicate the professional community we belong to. We're more likely to work remotely, and we don't need a lot of elaborate equipment to do this work, the same way that medical staff in hospitals or construction workers might. There frankly aren't a lot of props involved in the React performance, so we tend to go to extra efforts to create them. T-shirts do the same thing. They're visual signals that we're part of this shared group. Especially T-shirts that come from specific conferences, events, or companies. They give people around you social context for what sub-communities you're a member of, and your historical relationship to that community. I think some of us can be a little dismissive of this, but it serves a very legitimate function, especially if you live somewhere where you're likely to run into other developers at cafes or events. This becomes an efficient way of finding other community members. Another major way we perform our React identity is through language. You may be familiar with a handful of these terms. They sound very impressive. You can use prop drilling in your AHA PWA Jamstack app in concurrent mode for your micro front ends. I think it's fair to say the web development world is a hyperlinguistic place in a way that borders on ridiculous sometimes. There seems to be a compulsion to come up with new buzzwords and define new concepts all the time. Part of this is due to the fact that technology changes so quickly, we really do need new terms to help capture and refer to ways of doing things. But I think it's also a lot of this frenzy around creating words that's about trying to establish a common cultural identity. Each one of these has layers and layers of meaning to it. They have historical backstories, they involve prominent members of the community, and there's ongoing debates around their legitimacy. These are culturally rich terms, and knowing them is a marker of membership. So the interesting question here is why, right? Why do we feel the need to perform and display our Reactness through stickers and shirts and buzzwords? Why can't we just quietly get on with creating components and not worry about whether anyone else knows we're doing it? One obvious answer is that humans like to attach social meaning to everything we can. We are social creatures, and being part of a collective narrative is much more satisfying than an individual one. But this also has a lot to do with those fuzzy, fluid boundaries I mentioned earlier. When we're performing, we're negotiating our community identity on a couple different levels. So first, on an individual level, all of this signaling has the potential to benefit us personally. There's another anthropology concept called cultural capital. Just like financial capital, cultural capital is valuable information and knowledge that you hold within a community. It's the equivalent of street cred or clout. Knowing all the right buzzwords and having a t-shirt from a 2015 React conference signals to other developers that you're deep in the React community, that you're committed. This can have real payoff in the form of status or respect or deference. And second, I think it's also related to establishing React's place in the larger web development community. React is relatively young. It's only been around for 7 years, even though I know that is a lifetime in JavaScript. But young communities require a lot of signaling and performance. You have to show the world you are a thing and that you exist as a collective of people. We're also having to do it in an industry where the only constant is change. The speed of the web is ruthless. Libraries and frameworks fall in and out of favor faster than milk spoils. So it makes sense that we're a little bit anxious about whether our technology of choice is going to survive. Because if it doesn't, developers can sometimes take that hit personally. All the time you've invested into learning a technology and all the cultural capital you've built up within a community might vanish. This is kind of an uncomfortable thing for us to acknowledge, but it's a very genuine concern that comes out through cultural behavior. But how we frame our cultural narrative around this issue matters, because rather than think about survival, we can flip the narrative to think about it as cultural thriving. Having people talk about React, teaching React, and actively performing React in public inevitably helps all of us. It makes other people more likely to use React, who may advocate for it at their companies, which may lead to more React jobs. And so when it comes down to it, our collective performance of React does have material consequences in the world. However, we don't want to encourage ideas like the framework wars, where everyone's fighting to the death for who gets to build the web. That's not a helpful perspective. We can have multiple coexisting tools and multiple thriving communities around them, and there doesn't need to be a war of any kind. This is a great example of a real-world symbolic act that helps switch the narrative from survival to collaboration and mutual thriving. So this was when the Vue library hit a major milestone, and the React core team sent over a celebration cake. This might seem minor, but prominent members of a community making clear that we're not in a competition shifts our mindset. Rather than thinking we're picking one tool to hitch our identity to and then fighting for it to survive, we can instead choose to perform cultural acts that signal it's perfectly okay to learn multiple libraries and frameworks and be part of multiple communities. So now we have a better understanding of our internal React culture and our behavior within the web community. But what about our cultural performances and relationships with the outside world? With people who aren't web developers, aka, normal people, who only vaguely know what HTML is. To understand how we negotiate our boundaries between us and them and how we present ourselves to them, we need to look at magic and enchantment. So magic is a fairly strong theme among developers in general. It's in our blog posts and our library names and plenty of conference talks. We use it quite casually to say something auto-magically works, or joke that whatever is happening inside of Webpack is just dark magic. It's our way of saying programming is complex and life is too short to understand all the technical details happening inside a system, so we're just going to call it magic and move on. But in anthropology, magic has a very particular meaning. It's one of those cultural categories that shows up universally. It's not about card tricks or pulling rabbits out of hats. Those are very Western tropes that are more about illusion than magic. Magic is instead about how we deal with uncertainty. When someone has a particular goal in mind and they're unsure whether it's going to work out, they may call upon powers that they don't fully understand. That might mean those powers are unseen, hidden, immaterial, or simply unknown to them in some way. The narrative that modern technologies are magic is widespread in society, and it gets projected onto the people who seem to be in control of the technology. So we are the magicians here. Of course, what non-developers may not realize is that the layers of systems and low-level code that we build on top of are so deep and dense, the vast majority of us don't understand them at all, and yet we rely on them to perform our magical abilities. Especially if you're the only developer in a room full of product managers and designers, you act as the mediator between them and whatever mysterious process is making the website work. So we end up relying a lot on something called enchantment, which is how we perform our magical role. This definition comes from Alfred Gell, who wrote a lot about the relationship between technology and enchantment. Gell says that enchantment is the power that technical processes have of casting a spell over us so that we see the real world in enchanted form. It's when the creation process of something seems so technically complex that we can't even begin to understand it, and we react with a kind of shock and awe. If you've ever had a non-developer look over your shoulder while you're programming, and all they're seeing are bright colors and strange syntax, and the terminal spitting out messages faster than anyone could reasonably read them, you've performed an act of enchantment. And a lot of our cultural narratives, like comics and memes and tropes, reflect this experience. Outsiders seeing us use basic tools like the terminal often invokes ideas of hacking the mainframe and falling into the matrix. This all drives home a perception that developers are magical beings, that we have special powers. We end up being referred to as wizards or ninjas. We also get framed as animalistic or non-human in lots of ways, with terms like unicorns or saying we're a rare species. Human-like animals with magical powers are obviously a very well-worn mythological path in human storytelling, so it's easy to see where a lot of these narratives come from. Some of you may recognize this infamous tweet about the rare breed of 10x developers you might come across in the world, and you need to grab them as if we're out hunting on the safari. It plays into many of the magical narratives we just talked about, which is why so many of us found it both hilarious and worrying. It took the illusion to a ridiculous extreme. The thinking going on behind this tweet is a perfect example of what anthropologists call contagious magic, where simply being in contact with the magical object or person will transfer some of their magical properties onto you. So this tweeter is suggesting that the magical properties of a 10x developer will mysteriously transform your startup into a success. This is starting to cross the line where our magical presentations can sometimes become problematic. It's easy to see how cultivating the idea we're powerful magicians with special abilities is actually quite beneficial for us. The more we create black boxes around the work, the more enchanting it is to others who can't understand it, and the more magical power we get to hold. The rest of society then begins to tell narratives about how special we all are, and perhaps justify that they should pay us enormous sums of money to perform magical acts that they could never do themselves. This magical story we're telling can sometimes manifest as gatekeeping. Having magical power feels good, and if other people find out that our only powerful skill is how to Google things well, we're not going to be special unicorns anymore, which is the dark side to this cultural narrative because it makes normal people believe they could never get into programming themselves. It creates a cultural barrier to entry. Which brings us to the real power of React, which is neither magic nor concurrent mode. It's actually that knowing how to write React is a very culturally powerful position to be in. What we build has an awful lot of influence over people's lives in a way that many professions and communities do not have. We literally enable people to do things that solve problems. They can make to-do lists to not forget things or access banking services to pay bills. There are material realities to React apps that are involved in a daily basis of people's lives at an enormous scale. This brings us back to the problem of our little technological box from the beginning. Perhaps you can see now why saying that it's just a library for using user interfaces doesn't capture the full picture. React does not live inside a box. We've just seen there's an enormously rich world of cultural norms and language and symbols and performances that are intertwined with React. It includes all the people who are part of our immediate community, everyone building the tech itself and contributing to React culture. And it includes all the larger web development community that we collaborate with and coordinate with. And it involves all the people who we work alongside, but who aren't developers, but who are still essential in the process of creating React apps. So they're all the ones who might think we're powerful magicians. And then there's the layer of people who use React apps. These people have never and probably will never hear the word React. They are truly normal people doing all the jobs in society completely unrelated to web development, who have 1,000 things to think and worry about and no interest in code. This diagram of our relationship to these people isn't static. We make things that those outside people use. And in ways, they're subject to the cultural values and beliefs in the center of our system. What we build inside the circle flows outside the boundaries of our community, but carries our culture with it. So it's worthwhile for us to take a look at what we're actually building and pushing out into the world as a community. A few weeks ago, I spent a morning looking over some of the more recently updated React projects on GitHub. I skimmed over about 800 projects and noted down all the ones that had identifiable project names, so it's where I could tell what the app did from the name of it. This is a very unscientific study, but it might give us some vague indicators. If anyone wants to scrape GitHub data and get some proper statistics on this, I think it would be very interesting. But I just wanted to get a high-level sense of what React developers are generally building on any given Tuesday. While doing this, I skipped over any projects that were specifically focused on the developer experience, so any UI components or build tools. I'm not interested in what we're building for ourselves as much as what we're building for non-React developers out in the world. And so here's some of the trends and how frequently they showed up. There's an unsurprisingly large number of to-do apps and personal websites. We also have some weather apps and Pokedexes that came up a lot, which I assume were part of tutorial projects. And then we have signs of our current historical moment, with lots of COVID trackers and financial management apps. Some of the more culturally interesting ones that came up included an app to order customized burgers, one to memorize history facts about US states, and another that showed the price change in the cryptocurrency Ethereum. I specifically cherry-picked these because they do carry clear cultural values. They're just small examples of how we bake cultural beliefs into what we build. There's national affiliations in here, there's a cultural preference for individual choice, and there's interest in alternative forms of finance. My point here is that nothing we build is culturally neutral. Everything comes with cultural values attached, even to-do apps. It's not that they're doing anyone harm, but their popularity is almost entirely due to the fact they teach us the 4 basic components of create, read, update, and delete. But to-do apps inherently communicate cultural values, like productivity, the importance of work and getting things done, using quantified numbers to track things, focusing on the future more than reflecting on the past, the drive to optimize ourselves. They emphasize a task-driven, outcome-based flavor of human culture. These are not cultural givens. They're historically constructed, and they do serve political and economic ends. So this is just an invitation to reflect on what we build. When we're looking to build projects of our own, we base our ideas off what has already been built, so the system can quickly become a circular loop of self-reinforcing culture. Some of you may have heard of the paperclip machine thought experiment. So this comes from the field of AI. The philosopher Nick Bostrom wrote about it in their book Superintelligence. It imagines a world where we've built general AI and we assign it to make paperclips, but we forget to correctly factor in the value of human life in the algorithm. And the machine realizes that in order to make paperclips more efficiently, it would be beneficial to get rid of all the humans who take up lots of valuable resources that could instead be used to make paperclips. So all the humans get killed, and the world just gets transformed into a giant pile of paperclips. There are times when the cultural ecosystem of React feels a little bit like a runaway to-do app machine. I'm sort of joking, but there's a point to be made here. Technical cultural loops can act a little bit like automated algorithms if we don't see them and begin to pay close attention. There are times we want to check what course we're on and ask if we should rewrite parts of the algorithm. But we're in a better position than being stuck with computational algorithms. The wonderful part of culture is it's constantly evolving, and we have the agency to change it as individuals. Which is why it's important for us to pay attention to the cultural beliefs of the React community. We build what we believe and value into our systems. Now, of course, we're not always going to be in charge of what gets built if we work within large companies, or we might not be in the privileged position to pick what we work on. But some of us are in positions where we can choose what to build or not build, and who to work for or not work for. or even just what side projects to work on, or who to teach React to help spread the power around. I want to invite you to consider yourself as cultural participants as much as technologists. This means seeing yourself and your work within a cultural context. Some people might think that as a developer, culture has very little to do with them. Assuming that technology has nothing to do with culture is actually a cultural belief in itself. Our education system divides computer science from anthropology and sociology, and I assure you, anthropologists are not taught JavaScript. Both of these situations feel problematic to me. So I want to invite you back over that line in the sand. You should pay attention to the culture of the React community, as well as the social dimensions of what you build with React. Everything is cultural, including React. So I want to leave you with this quote from Bruno Latour, who put it a lot more poetically than I did, when he said, technology is society made durable. We end up embedding our cultural beliefs into code. And if we're the people writing the code, what kind of culture and society is being made durable? Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, y'all. I don't know about you, but I was just sitting back here listening to that like, yes, 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 feeling so seen. And as far as I can tell from chat, a lot of y'all feel seen too. I know I, in particular, this is what I love about React Rally and great community conferences like this, is that they're welcoming to members of the cultural phenomenon of React, like myself, who are not actually React developers. Oh no. But it's all good because this is a culture we're building together. So thank you so much, Maggie, for articulating all of that so fabulously. And I hope it gives us a lot to think about as we go into the rest of the conference today. And like a good energy that we can bring to it is remembering that we are all here to build this beautiful culture together. So let's put that first.